Hello everyone and welcome back to Chess Programming Game Design with me. So today we're going to be working on special movements such as the castling or en passant or the when a pawn reaches the other side and they need to change the piece. We might get through all of them, we might only get through one. We're going to start with the king's castling. So by castling, what I mean is the following. When there's enough space for the king to move across, so for example here, when there's enough space between the king and the rook, the king should be able to move to, the king should be able to move to here, and the rook would move to here. So what happens, the way I think of it is the rook slides to the king and then the king jumps over the rook. The same thing will happen to the left side, so the rook slides to the king, and then the king jumps over the rook. So the king would be at the bishop spot and the rook would be at the queen spot. But that can only happen as long as there are no pieces in between them. And as long as neither the rook or the king have made any moves in this game. So moves made is going to have to equal to 0. Is going to be one of the conditions. Where we're going to put them. So how I have it in my mind set out and how I have it in my other program set out is we put it in a different else if statement, and then in a later video what we're going to make is another class which is going to contain the moves and whether the move is a special case move or a normal move. Which means for now we're just going to make the different else if. And also you might have noticed that I've decided to move the shading of squares to a separate thing in all of the pieces. That's not difficult, I showed you how to do it a few videos ago, so I'm not going to go through that once again. Because doing this is going to help us with the special move cases as well. So where we are going to do this is just after this one. We can also actually condense this into just one if statement with an or in between here. So let's do that really quickly. Just paste that in and we can just delete that completely. And now we want an else if at this spot. So either this is correct, so this is the normal king's movement checking, or we have another condition which is actually quite big. But let's get started with the normal things. So we have to make sure that the king has made no moves this game. So that's quite simple. That's the first thing. The next thing, we also need to make sure that because this king, the king script is referring to both the black king and the white king. I think that I am actually going to keep it that way. I don't have to separate them even for castling. I just have to check that their rows are the same as what I'm comparing it to. So what this is doing is I'm looking at a certain square. So for example, I'm looking at this square. If this square is in the same row as the king, then it would be, well, this square in our case actually, it would be a valid move because it's in the same row as this king that we would have selected. Because we wouldn't be allowed to select the opponent's king, that's fine, so we can castle our own king and we can't castle the black king. Hopefully that makes sense. So as long as it's on the same row and it fits the other conditions as well, then it's going to be a valid move for the person's move whose it is. So that's the second thing. And then we need to separate two things with an or statement. So we need to be checking the left and right side. So what we're checking for is, so let's just set this up first. There we go. So we're going to be checking the left side with these parentheses and the right side with these parentheses. So that so this is the universal thing that needs to be correct for any time the king castles, and then we have a different checking for depending on which side it is. So simply the first thing we need to check is that the column of where we're wanting to castle to is the correct column. So that column is the second column as well as the sixth column. So on the left side, we need to make sure that j.int call not int call is we said 2. Because we're working with a list, it starts at 0, so 0, 1, 2 would be there. And what happens is the rook slides to the king jumps over the rook, and that's column 2. Similarly, here we want to make j.int call equals 6 in this case, because the king can go to there and then the rook does its thing, or the rook slides to the king and then the king jumps over the rook, and the king would end up to that spot. So that would be the valid move. The next thing we want to check is, well, that there are no pieces in between. Or actually we can do that last because that's the longest bit. The next thing we want to check is that the rook hasn't made any moves. So we want to make sure that the piece that we're looking at has a piece in it so that we don't get an error. So how we simply do that is j.piece in square doesn't equal null. We can simply do that for both sides. There we go. Let's actually full screen this because it's going to be quite a long line of code actually, I can tell you that much. Wait, did I do something? No, okay, here we are. So we want to make sure that there is a piece in the square that we're looking at so we don't get an error. And then we want to make sure that that piece hasn't made any moves. So j.piece in square dot moves made equals 0. The same thing for this side. So we don't actually need to check that it's a rook. This is because if the king has moved to there, then the king would have made one move and it won't be able to castle. If the king hasn't made any moves, but this rook has made a move, and then another piece comes into the rook's position, then the piece which has moved into the rook's position will have moves greater than 0. So again, we wouldn't be able to castle. So we don't actually need to check whether that piece is our piece or the rook. We can just check that it hasn't made any moves. And that's enough. And then the last thing we need to check here, as I said previously, is that there are no pieces in between. So on the left side, let's do this again, so that I can look at the columns. The canvas dot all squares dot piece in square equals null. So we're just going to look at the specific cases, and this dot in row is going to be the first argument, and the second argument is going to be the different columns. So we're going to want to make sure that on the row of the king and the different columns there are no pieces. So this is column 1 equals null. Let's just copy this, and then on 2 there shouldn't be any pieces, and on 3 there shouldn't be any pieces. There we go. This is, so now we have the left side sorted. That should be separated with an AND. There we go. So let's move on to the right side. I believe over here, yes, good. Now on the right side we have different columns. That's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So we want to make sure that 5 and 6 are empty. And 6. Another way we could do this is checking that all squares has no children, like we have been doing for other cases. For example, like here. Or no, not like there. Like here, but I think that that's longer, seeing as we need to do .gameObject.transform.child count. Currently what we're doing is just doing .piece in square equals null. And because piece in square is for us by default, oh, it should be anyway, set by default to null. So by default, if we set it to null, we're not going to get any errors. And because if it's set by default to null, we should be fine. Does this mean that I actually haven't altered the game manager? I probably haven't altered the check selection game manager to change that to null, so let's do that now as well. Let's just find where I do that over here. So we want to current piece selection dot square of piece dot piece in square. Well, let me just think about this for a second. So there are a few things I need to do actually. So this line of code can't stay in here. That's fine. However, I do want to add another thing to this. To the whole program, which is in piece. I want to add a new, what's it called? Not variable, but it's like a variable of the class, which is going to be the square of piece. I think that we did have this at one point and then we removed it, and now I'm adding it again because it's going to help us for later on. So we are going to add it to here. Then in start we're going to make sure to, well, we're going to make a function that's going to, or a method that's going to set it. And then in start, wherever start is, we're going to call that method so that the piece of square gets set. And then in game manager, once again, we want to make sure that when a move has been made, the current piece selection dot set square of piece, so that the piece that has been moved knows its new square. There we go. And now if we go back to king, the equals null should work properly. And I think that we are done with that. So let's check whether the king has a valid move to the spot that we would expect him to. Move that to there. And no, it doesn't. So let's find our error. What I forgot to do is actually add the move to valid moves, and also I just noticed that this doesn't actually do anything. Well, it makes our else if not work the way we want it to, because we need to be looking at the left and right blocks separately, and also that's only looking at the square, which is going to be empty anyway, so it's not actually going to work. So at the start of our left side, let me just find the or, and then find the parenthesis. What's the singular of parentheses? I don't actually know. I need to find that out. And where is the... ah, there we go. That's the ending of that. So I'm going to add another condition here, which is going to be that, so because I'm looking at the left side, I do the canvas dot all squares and dot piece in square, again dot moves made equals 0, and this is going to be this dot int row, i.e. the king's row, as well as the column of 0 for the left side and the column of 7 for the right side. However, before we do this, we have to make sure that there is a piece here, otherwise we are going to get an error. And I just lost it. I think it's this one. Maybe not. Where was I? I hate it when I have to work on this, on massive lines of code. Yeah, okay, it is this. So I don't actually have to go that far. And oops, there we go. I can delete one of the parentheses pairs. We have to make sure that this isn't null. There we go. Similarly for the other side. Good, I've copied the correct thing. Just before that, put an and there. Instead of the 0 here, we put a 7. And once we run it, let's check now. Move the pawns. So this is going to check the right side. Oh, it doesn't work again. Let's see again. Well, I found my error. And it was, well, you don't actually need to check that pieces in square of the square that you're looking at isn't null, because, well, it is supposed to be null, and I was just thinking that I'm looking at the castle at a rook at that point, but I'm not. I checked that later on. So you just need to delete those lines where you're using the j dot piece in square doesn't equal null, as well as the j dot piece in square and with moves made. So j dot piece in square, if you can just do Ctrl F, search for j dot piece in square and wherever you have used it, and see for the places where it shouldn't be used. Look for the places where it shouldn't be used, and that should be fine if you delete it. So now I've actually tested it and it does work. Ignore the log, as I've said before, because that doesn't influence gameplay in any way. And now, as you can see, I can move the king to there. And in later lessons we are going to make sure that the rook also moves to where he's supposed to. Just to demonstrate, I am going to show you that it works both ways. I did not actually mean to move the pawn that far out, but it shouldn't exactly matter. Or actually, yeah, it will. Ah, that's annoying. There we go. Let's move the pawn. No, that's wrong once again. Am I ever going to get it right? Here we go, I think I am. I got it right constantly for the other side, and now I'm just doing it wrong all the time. And there we go. The king moves to the correct spot. And as I said again later on, the rook is going to move to where he's supposed to as well. So that's going to be it for today's lesson. We have scripted the new condition for a new valid move for the king, so that later on we can script castling. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please do give me a like, share and subscribe. It encourages me to make more of this kind of videos. And yeah, if you didn't understand something, do feel free to ask in the comments down below. I will answer your questions as soon as possible. Until next time, again, thank you so much for watching and goodbye.